The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Encirca's .bank webinar, Securing Your Brand in .bank, a primer for banks interested in the .bank domain name extension. This webinar will be recorded and it can be found online. The slide deck can also be found online and downloaded at www.encirca.com/bank. Here are our webinar presenters today. Our first presenter will be Craig Schwartz, FTLD Registry Managing Director, managing .bank and .insurance domain registries. Also former Chief Registry Liaison with ICANN. John McElwain, partner of Nelson, Mullins, Riley & Scarborough, unfortunately cannot make it with us today, but he focuses on intellectual property litigation and strategy. He was voted one of the best lawyers in America from 2013 to 2015. He is also Vice Chair of the Internet Committee for the International Trademark Association. His part of the presentation will be covered by Thomas Barrett, President of Encirca, first .bank accredited registrar founded in 2001. Encirca is also the sole registrar serving on FTLD's Security Requirements Working Group. They are also a trademark agent for the Trademark Clearinghouse. This is our agenda for the webinar today. We'll start off with an introduction to new GTLDs. We'll move into .bank domain policies. Then we'll go on to trademark protection and finish off with the registration process and .bank costs. I'd like to encourage you to please enter all questions into the question box of your GoToWebinar widget. All questions will be held until the end of the presentation and they will all be addressed. Without further ado, for an introduction on new GTLDs, I'd like to hand it to Tom Barrett. Tom?
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone to our .bank webinar. We've done this several times already, and so we're always interested in your questions. But real quickly, let me give you an overview of the current internet landscape. Most of you probably have a website today using .com or .uk in your country code. But since last year, the internet has seen a huge expansion of available extensions. Almost 400 were launched in 2014. We expect an equal number in 2015. And those extensions range from brand names like .ibm to city names like .london, .nyc, to some of the silly names, .ninja, .rocks. There's also names for professionals, .lawyer, .realtor. All of these new extensions have rights for trademark owners, and so they have what's called a mandatory sunrise period that must be followed for trademark owners. We'll talk more about that later. And all of them must be sold through accredited registrars. And so if you have a .com today, you might use GoDaddy or Network Solutions. Unfortunately, both of those companies are not supporting .bank. There are a dozen or so registrars like Encirca that you can go to register your .bank domain name. .bank is launching in May with its sunrise period, and then in June with its general availability period. The registry is also launching .insurance in the fall of 2015. Next slide. So how is .bank different from .com or .ninja, etc.? First of all, as you'll hear in a second, it is owned by the banking community and managed by the banking community. It has very strict eligibility criteria to make sure that only chartered banks and their core processors are allowed to get domain names. The names that you apply for in .bank must match a name that you currently have rights to. It could be your company name. It could be your current domain name in .com. However, your current .com domain name does not give you priority to that name in .bank. Remember, .bank is a global top-level domain name. And so anyone in the world can be applying for that .bank domain name. And finally, there are some strict security requirements in .bank, ranging from DNSSEC and DMARC, and we'll talk more about these later. So that's a quick overview for .bank, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Tom. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Craig Schwartz for .bank policies.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Tom, for inviting FTLD to participate in this webinar. You're right, we've done a number of these so far, and we continue to learn and hopefully provide helpful information for banks and other registrants to secure their domains in a timely manner. Let's go to the next slide. So a little bit about FTLD Registry. It is a private company that was formed exclusively for the purposes of applying for and operating financially oriented domains. We are, as Tom mentioned, owned, operated, and governed by a number of banks, insurance companies, and banking trade associations. So we very much are focused on how do we serve and protect the banking and insurance sectors amidst the launch of this crazy internet expansion when there are so many new domains, in fact many of them financially oriented, and how do we differentiate ourselves from the others. And as Tom already alluded to, and we'll get into more detail shortly, it is and the core of the trust and the value in .bank and .insurance are the strict eligibility requirements coupled with the enhanced security components. Why don't we move on to the next slide. So when we talk about strict eligibility for .bank, you can see that there are a number of types of entities that are listed here as being eligible for domain names in .bank. By and far, we expect the vast majority of registrants to be chartered and supervised banks. Some banking trade associations may be interested in it. There may be regulators that are interested, and industry service providers specifically refer to what we call core processors. Those are the organizations that help banks run their online banking platform or their online banking services. Some core processors completely are responsible for managing the web presence of their banking customers. So we thought that in order to enable core processors to continue to serve banks the way they always have, that it would be very important for them to be part of this ecosystem as well. So we do provide an opportunity for core processors to be registrants or to secure .bank domains. Let's move on. So bank has enhanced security, and this is really the heart of how we are different than any other domain name or any other domain registry that is available today. And we say with a high degree of confidence that out of the box, a .bank domain is going to be more secure for banks and their customers than any other domain extension. It doesn't mean that you can't add on or bolt on other products and services to your other domain extensions. But if you're not currently doing that and you're looking for something that is trusted and protected and more secure, then .bank is the place to be. I'll talk briefly about mandatory verification, and I know Tom's going to cover it in a later slide. We have retained the services of Symantec Corporation, one of the world's leading companies on security and authenticating the identity of individuals and organizations, to provide the verification services for us. Symantec will verify that the person requesting the domain is an employee of the bank, that they are authorized by the bank to register domain names on its behalf, and that the domain names that the entity has selected or applied for comply with our name selection policies, and we'll get to those in a minute as well. DNSSEC is a technology. It is a cryptographic key that is associated with your website or your domain name system records, and it's intended largely to ensure that when visitors go to your website that they're actually getting the place that they selected versus the possibility of being redirected to some other type of fictitious or perhaps even malicious site. Email authentication is a way of advertising to email service providers such as Google and Microsoft and Yahoo, advertising certain rules that you will set for your domain name. And it could be that for at least the near term, you may set a rule that says we do not use our domain. So maybe it's Craig.bank if I'm using myself. We do not generate email from Craig.bank. And by setting that rule, when email purporting to be from a Craig.bank email address is originated by perhaps a spoofer or a spammer or a phisher, this rule would enable a Google or a Microsoft to restrict that email from being delivered, and thus the intended recipient would never get that bad email. You might also set as a policy with this email authentication component that we only send emails from specific IP addresses. And again, if an email purporting to be from your bank is originating from an IP address that's not associated with what you've set in your policy, then the email service providers will not deliver that email. So email authentication is a great way to ensure trusted communications with your internal and external customers, and it's a great marketing tool, I think, to say that ultimately if an email is not coming from a .bank address, then it's not coming from us, your bank. Enhanced encryption is a way of ensuring that communications, you as the bank, your registrars, and us as the registry operator have these standards mitigate the ability for the bad actors to eavesdrop on what we're saying to one another and or to tamper with or manipulate the data that's in a communication. So another good feature. Multi-factor authentication is a process that if you go with Encirca as your registrar, or any other registrar for that matter, this is a system that all registrars have to implement that requires that when the bank wants to change information in their registration data, that they have to have two pieces of information. That is, information they know, which would be a username and a password, and information they have, which could be a one-time hard token or soft token, hence the term multi-factor authentication. The value of this is to prohibit, again, bad actors from getting into your registration data and changing, for example, your name server address. And if someone does get in and change your name server address, they could redirect web traffic from the intended site or your bank's website to another. And having this authentication piece in place is intended to prohibit that type of malicious activity. Prohibition of proxy and privacy service basically says that the underlying registration data associated with your domain name must be that of the bank. You cannot use a proxy service provider to register domain names on your behalf. You cannot hide the true identity of yourself as the legal owner of that domain name. And this prohibition's really come out of input we've received and in general registries have received from law enforcement officials around the world that have said when there's a privacy or proxy registration, it's really hard to track down the bad guys because they're hiding behind this type of service. So what we've said in .bank and .insurance is we cannot have such services. Now, a question that I get frequently is, my core processor registers domain names on our behalf. Can they still do that, or is it considered a proxy registration? And the answer is yes, your core processor can still register domain names and manage domain names on your behalf. However, the contact information associated with the registration must be for that of the bank, so that when the verification process is commenced by Symantec, they're confirming information with the bank and not the core service provider. So a slight nuance there, but it shouldn't dramatically change the way banks and core processors currently work together. Next slide, please. So the naming selection policies for .bank are very specific and are intended to prevent companies or banks from getting domain names that they either don't have a right to, or from registering a domain name that is a malformed version of another company's name. For example, in other domains outside of .bank, you might see Bank of America registered with a 0 instead of an O, or something else that is intended to trick customers and internet users into thinking they're going to where they need to go or where they'd like to go, but in actuality that's not happening. So our name selection policy is very specific. It is that during the general availability period starting on June 24th, that domain names must correspond to a trademark, a trade name, or service mark of your bank. Doesn't mean that the trademark has to be a registered trademark, but you have to be able to demonstrate some right, and it could be a common law right that you've obtained over time through use of that name, and that would need to be provided and would need to be able to be verified by Symantec during the verification process. We do have some names that are not available at all for registration. We have a general class of names called generic domains, such as checking.bank or savings.bank. And at least initially, these types of domains are not going to be available. As you can see at the bottom of the page here, there's a link that Encirca has provided excuse me, for all of the generic names that are reserved, and I also need to caveat that that list is not exhaustive. And just because you don't see a name on the list doesn't mean that it is completely available for registration. The other class of names are called common community names, such as Peoples or Citizens or First National, which are names that are commonly used, particularly in the United States, by many, many, many banks. And we decided, and our board of directors decided, that at least initially we would reserve those names from registration. We might make them available at some point in the future, but for now, names such as Citizens.bank or Liberty.bank or Community.bank are not available for registration. What you can do is you can combine a common community name with some other prefix or suffix to apply for the name you'd like to have. So if you are the Community Bank of Mississippi, you might want CommunityMS.bank or CBMS.bank. So there's a lot of leeway during the general availability period to structure names in a way that best suits your organization. I think that Tom may get to this a little bit later in his slides where he's covering today for John McElwain, but I did want to also highlight that during the sunrise period, which is the first registration period open to the public, which starts on May 18th, sunrise registrations must be an exact match of the mark that you've registered with ICANN's Trademark Clearinghouse. And again, I know that Tom will speak to that shortly. Looking at the third bullet, let's actually go back one slide. Domains are limited to alphanumeric characters. We currently are not permitted by ICANN to give out letter second level domains, so what us.bank or ab.bank. And so if you're looking to go through a pre-screening process with either Encirca or some other registrar, just be advised that you are at least now prohibited from requesting the common community names, 2-character, 2-letter domains, and any of the reserved names that are mandated by ourselves or either ICANN. Let's move on to the next slide. So here are some examples of how you might structure your domain name given our name selection policies. Again, there's a lot of leeway in how creative you can be, and our intention is not to deny a bank a domain name that it reasonably believes it's entitled to. So again, during general availability, the corresponding rule applies. During the sunrise period, the exact match rule applies. Let's move on. So I'm turning the mic back over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Craig. I'd like to remind everyone that if you do have any questions throughout this webinar, to please enter them into the question box in the lower right-hand corner of your go-to widget. At this point, John McElwain unfortunately cannot join us, so Tom Barrett will be covering his part on trademark protection. Tom?
Thank you, Andrew. And we do have contact details for John at the end of the presentation, so if you have very specific trademark questions that we can't answer for you, John's available as well. A real quick overview of the launch plan for .bank. We've mentioned already about this sunrise period for trademark owners, and what we mean by that is anyone who has a trademark registered with a national trademark office like the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office or in the European Union. If you're not sure whether or not you have one, Encirca can help check for you. But if you do have a registered trademark, then you would first go to the Trademark Clearinghouse and submit your trademark to the clearinghouse. That process is underway right now. And again, Encirca is a trademark agent to the clearinghouse, so we can help you with that process as well. We do recommend that you complete the Trademark Clearinghouse process by May 10th so that you have plenty of time to apply during the sunrise period. The sunrise period is a first-come, first-served allocation, which means that even though many banks might have a trademark on the same name, whoever registers that name first will get the name. And so it's very important for you to know when the registry is going to start accepting applications, both for sunrise period as well as general availability period. We have the exact times on this slide here. It's 8 p.m. Eastern Time on May 17th and 8 p.m. Eastern Time on June 23rd. And again, because it's first come, first served, the sooner you get your application in, the better. And as we'll explain later, Encirca will in fact take your order now, pre-screen it to make sure that all your information is correct, and automatically submit it for you when the registry opens for business. Next slide. I won't spend too much time on the eligibility for Sunrise, but in order to be eligible for Sunrise, you do need that registered trademark. It must be registered at a patent and trademark office. If you're wondering about whether or not you can still apply for a trademark with the trademark office, in the U.S. anyway, the answer is no. It's typically an 8-month process to go through the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. If you're really, really desperate, John can help you apply for a trademark in another jurisdiction. But more importantly, we can help you determine if your bank has a trademark. We can also help you determine if there's another bank who has a trademark in the clearinghouse today, which means it's likely they might apply for it during the sunrise period. Next slide. So I've already talked about the sunrise period. You must go through a registrar such as Encirca. You still have to get validated by Symantec to make sure that you are a bank The only difference here is that the corresponding rules that Craig talked about do not apply during Sunrise. Instead, the domain name you apply for must be an exact match of your trademark. So that limitation is for Sunrise only. It goes away in general availability. Next slide. So I'll go right into this next section, which is talking about the registration process. Again, we want to remind you that if you have any questions, please enter them into the question box, and we will address all those questions at the end of the webinar. So let's talk about the registration process and how that will work. So if you go to a registrar like Encirca, you'll put in your name. The first thing we will check for is to see if the name you're entering is a valid domain name. So it must have valid characters. So it must not have any spaces or ampersands, for example. It must not be a reserved name that Craig talked about earlier. So it can't be us.bank, for example. It cannot be a common community name or some other reserved names. If the registry is open for business, then that name will be submitted in real time to the back-end registry provider and reserved for the first person who makes that application. While it's in that pending status, it then will get verified by Symantec. And so there's additional information that you need to provide as part of that .bank domain name that you don't provide today, say for a .com domain name. Symantec will probably take two days to complete that process. Assuming that you're successful, the domain name then gets released from the pending status and is registered for you. It's important to note that you do not need a trademark in order to apply for .bank. The trademark is only required for the Sunrise period. And you do not need to use the name right away. So you can continue to use your existing website, say under .com, for as long as you wish. And in fact, when you decide to activate your .bank domain name, you can continue to use both websites in parallel. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the information that you need to provide to get verified for .bank. First of all, Symantec, while that name is in hold, will undergo a security check on the entity that's applying for the name. They will check that your banking credentials are still current and valid. They will look at the domain name you are requesting to make sure it does correspond in some way to your existing rights and legal name. They'll verify your physical address. They'll verify that the phone number you provided is actually the phone number for your bank. And they also will verify that the person who applied on behalf of the bank does in fact work at the bank as a full-time employee and has authority to act on behalf of the bank. And so they would do this by calling either the HR department to ensure that you work there. They may also call your immediate manager or supervisor to ensure that you've been authorized to apply for that name. So this verification process will take about 2 days, and the registry plans to repeat it at least every 2 years. Next slide. So when you apply for the name, you do not need to activate it right away. In fact, by default, with Encirca anyway, to make sure that there's a speedy registration process, we will not be using name servers for these names. We want to make sure you get your name first and secure it, and then we can deal with the activation later. You can continue to use your .com website for as long as you want. In fact, when you activate your .bank domain name, you can forward it to your existing website and vice versa. There are some requirements that are different for a .bank domain name than your current website. For example, you must use .bank name servers. And again, Encirca will provide this as a value-added service if your current web hosting provider is unable or unwilling to do it. So a name server typically is ns1.mylocal.bank, ns2.mylocal.bank. So those name servers must end in .bank. So in terms of the services that Encirca is providing, that I think makes us stand out from some of the other registrars out there, we do offer a free pre-screening service, and so you can fill out a pre-screening application today, and we will tell you if the name you're applying for is valid. We will allow you to, we'll check the Trademark Clearinghouse to see if there's any other trademarks in there that might be competing with your name. We will check the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to see if you have a trademark on your name. We also have the ability to take your order once we've approved it, once you've paid for it, and insert it into our auto submission queue so that at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we will automatically submit your application for you, so you don't need to be at the keyboard furiously typing away. In terms of payment, we do not require payment up front, and so you can go through this process. We approve your application, we screen it, and then we give you the ability to pay after the fact, after you received your internal approval. As long as you pay prior to the submission, you're all set. We do have some optional services that we'll talk about as well. The premium DNS service, again, is a premium service that makes sure that you can activate your .bank domain name using .bank name servers, and also includes DNSSEC, which is required for .bank, and DMARC for email security, which is also required for .bank. We also, you're allowed to apply for as many .bank domain names as you wish. And so we do have banks, for example, they have a retail bank name they use another domain name for corporate email. They might have an abbreviation or acronym of their bank name that they want to reserve as well. And so you have no limit to the number of names that you do apply for. But we also recognize that some banks, for budgetary reasons, really just want one name. And in the event their primary name is not available, then they want us to apply for a fallback or backup name. And so we are offering a service where you can specify a backup name that we submit only in the event that your primary name is taken by someone else. Next slide. So the cost for .bank domain names is fairly high. It's $999 per year per domain name that you apply for. This includes the application process, the pre-screening process, the verification process, and the registration process. And that is an annual fee. As I mentioned earlier, you can submit your information today for pre-screening and for a free consultation and pay later as long as the payment is received prior to submission of your order. The registry will hold back a processing fee if for any reason you apply for a name you're not eligible for, or if you get rejected by Symantec. And so we need to hold back a fee as well. But with our pre-screening process, we're hoping to not have that problem. Next slide. So I mentioned some of the optional services. As I mentioned, you do not need to activate your .bank domain name right away. And so when and if you decide to activate it, you could talk to your existing web provider to see if they support .bank or DNSSEC or DMARC. We do have an optional service that we will provide to you as well. Our optional service is fully compliant with all of the new security requirements for .bank. It uses .bank, your .bank domain name for the name servers, and includes web forwarding to your existing website, and you can use our service for all of your domain names, not only your .bank domain names, but all of your .com, .net, etc. domain names as well. And again, it does not change your website in any way. It simply changes who's providing the DNS for your service. So that's $199 a year. Our fallback service that I mentioned is $200 for a one-time fee, and you may, in fact, specify multiple fallback names if your first or second choice is not available. Next slide. So how do you maximize your success? Well, certainly you need to decide what your desired names are, find out if, in fact, those are on the reserved names list or not. Find out if you have competition for those names. And so we can help you determine, for example, if not only if you have a trademark on that name at the trademark office, but if someone else does too, who's in the banking industry, we can tell you if someone else has already submitted that name to the Trademark Clearinghouse, which means they are likely to apply during the sunrise period. We will also tell you if one of our other customers is applying for that same name. Go through your internal review process, select your names, complete the pre-screening process with Encirca, pay for your name, and you will be inserted into our auto-submission queue. And if you feel like your name might be fairly competitive, either in the U.S. or globally, because remember .bank is a global TLD, you can also specify fallback names. So that's the webinar we have for you today. Again, if you have any questions, we'll answer them now. On the screen, you can see the URL to go to Encirca's website and start the pre-screening process. You also can send us an email, .bank@encirca.com, and we will schedule a free phone consultation with you to answer any one-on-one questions you might have. And if you are interested in applying for a trademark to try to get eligible for Sunrise, we have John McElwain's contact details here. But again, we can start that process for you, and certainly we're able to check to see if you have a trademark in the USPTO. We also can check to see if there's a trademark in the clearinghouse for you. So with that, I'll turn this over to Andrew, and I want to thank everyone for their time today.
Thanks, Tom. We have a couple questions regarding the presentation. The first seems like a good segue for trademark questions. We have a bank with a trademark that wants to know what exactly would be the process of going about participating in Sunrise.
So I can take this. So if you have a trademark, let's say it's with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, then you can go to the Trademark Clearinghouse yourself. It's located at trademark-clearinghouse.com. It's an organization managed out of Belgium, and you can create your own account and go through that process. Or you can come to a certified trademark agent, and Encirca is one of those agents. The information you need to provide is obviously your trademark information, so your registration number, your trademark string. You also will need to provide a certification that, in fact, you are the trademark owner. You also will need to provide a proof of use specimen that proves that you are actually using that trademark in commerce. And there are a variety of examples that qualify as proof of use specimens. And again, we can help you walk you through that process. Once you submit that, our fee for that, for example, is $250. That is an annual fee. That makes you eligible for the Sunrise period for all of the new TLDs. So it's not just .bank, but also .insurance that's coming out later this year. You can also apply during that Sunrise period. It also will make you eligible for a watching service to see if anyone else registers your name in any of the other hundreds of new TLDs that are launching. But once you complete that process, you are given a special token called the Sign Mark Data File, or SMD file. And that's the token that you need to provide to a registrar like Encirca and provide and apply during the Sunrise period. So The trademark clearinghouse process itself, I would give yourself about 5 to 10 days to get through that process. It does cost $250 from Encirca anyway. And then once you have that token, you can apply during the .bank sunrise period in May.
Okay, thank you. Now, where would we go to start the process with Encirca?
So if you go to encirca.com/bank, that would certainly be for the .bank process. If you wanted to start the process with the trademark clearinghouse, go to encirca.com and select the icon for the trademark clearinghouse. And I want to emphasize that a trademark is not required for .bank. So most of you probably don't have a trademark, and you can simply apply during the general availability, so you can start the pre-screening process today. But if you feel like you do have a trademark, then you could go through that trademark clearinghouse process.
Thank you. That's in fact my next question. Say a bank does not have a trademark, but they own a .com name. What would be the situation in which they cannot get their .com equivalent in .bank?
So there are today, 800 extensions like .com, 800. So every country in the world, from .us to .uk, .au for Australia, they all have domain names. And many of those, of course, are English-speaking as well. So a bank in any country can be applying for the same name as you, even if you own the .com domain name. So the .com name does not give you any special priority rights. In fact, there probably are other banks in the U.S. that would love to have your .com domain name. And so it's just important to realize that you get no special rights because of your .com domain name.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like we actually have one more question. So say a bank would like to start the pre-screening process now. They select pay later. What happens between now and June 23rd when .bank goes live for general availability?
So for the Encirca process, we will review your application. We will let you know if we spot any discrepancies or issues with your application. We will also then take your application and add it to our submission queue to make sure it has a spot reserved in that queue, and then we will send you an invoice so that you can handle payment for the application. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to come back online and press a button on June 23rd. What will happen is once we submit that application for you on June 23rd, Symantec will then go through its verification process and will make a phone call to your bank. So you want to make sure that your HR department or whoever is in charge of HR is available to answer that phone, can verify that, in fact, the person who applied is a full-time employee of the bank, and can verify that they were authorized to apply for those names on behalf of the bank. And that's all you need to do.
Thank you very much. And the last final question would be regarding the name servers for hosting .bank. To help ease the transition for bank customers from the .com to the .bank domain name, they can set up a URL redirect, I believe. So if they type in a .com, it will then forward the traffic to a .bank name. Will that diminish any of the added security that .bank offers?
So yeah, there's actually, we get these questions two ways. You either you can forward a .com domain to your .bank website, or you can forward your .bank domain name to your .com website. In terms of the requirements for .bank, it's easier in a sense to activate your .bank domain name and forward it to your .com domain name. So in order to activate it, you do need the .bank name servers, you do need DNSSEC, but if you're not yet using that .bank domain name for email, then you don't need to add the DMARC DNS record, and you can forward that to your .com website. If in fact you want to go the other way and forward your .com to .bank, then you first need to get your .bank website up and running and fully compliant with all of their security requirements before you do that.
Great. Thank you very much. At this point, we have no further questions. I would like to thank Craig Schwartz from FTLD Registry for joining us today. I'd like to thank Tom Barrett from Encirca Domain Registrar. I'd like to remind you, in order to initiate the order and screening process, please go to encirca.com/bank. Of course, Encirca offers free consultations if you have any more questions. If you'd like to set up a free consultation, please email .bank@encirca.com. Also, if you have any trademark questions regarding Sunrise or a federal trademark, you can send all of your questions to John McElwain at john.mcElwain@nelsonmullins.com. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this morning, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.